The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
So there's a carjacking outside of 7-Eleven in downtown Washington, D.C., and the cop calls the CEO of Bank of America and says, I need every person in your bank who's ever bought a gun anytime, anywhere. It's an ongoing criminal investigation. Everything Everywhere All at Once won the Oscar last year for the best movie, but it's not the standard for a Fourth Amendment warrant. And I think this is about as important of a hearing as we can have, because if they're doing it to members of Congress's staff, reporters who are engaging in all of this, imagine what's going on at another time. By the way, the Supreme Court agrees with me, and we'll get into that in a little bit. When the Bank of America provided the FBI a list of people who made financial transactions with their Bank of America card in Washington, D.C. between January 5th and January 7th, 2021. The practice of sweeping up thousands of Americans without probable cause and specify in a search for specific suspects is inconsistent with the specificity requirement of the Fourth Amendment and the entire criminal justice system. Considering how many Americans use Bank of America credit or debit cards, this list must have included thousands of people. This list almost certainly included members of Congress, their staff, who were performing constitutionally mandated functions, as well as reporters who were engaged in First Amendment protected activity. Countless of other individuals were swept into this surveillance without probable cause. The list included people who had a history of purchasing a firearm at any time, which is a constitutionally protected activity. So we likely have violations of the First, Second, and Fourth Amendment. The fact that Americans' data is handed over to the feds on a fishing expedition by the banking industry because their customers were present in a particular region or purchased a constitutionally protected item is unacceptable. And I reject any argument that this financial information is subject to third-party doctrine and therefore an exception to the Fourth Amendment. And I've been arguing this for years. The third-party exception in the modern economy threatens to make the Fourth Amendment irrelevant. The Fourth Amendment it's survived telephoto lenses, drones, listening devices, tracking devices. The Fourth Amendment has proved to be incredibly resilient. But this is the place. This is the place where Congress has to act. Because the Supreme Court seems to agree with that concern based on Carpenter v. U.S. Mr. Michel, the majority opinion in Carpenter stated that the cell site location information is, quote, detailed, encyclopedic, and effortlessly compiled. Is the financial transaction data that was released here any less detailed, encyclopedic, and effortlessly compiled in relation to a Fourth Amendment legal analysis?
I don't believe.
Can you imagine any judge in the country who would make a probable cause finding to authorize a search warrant for all of this detailed financial information on this many people with this set of facts?
No.
Mr. Tedesco?
No.
There's also similarities with this in U.S. v. Chatry. A federal court found that a geofence warrants violate the Fourth Amendment. Geofence warrants are a practice where law enforcement seeks location data on any device within a specific time and geographic region where a crime took place. The court found that it is insufficient for law enforcement to obtain the data based solely on information that a suspect possessed a cell phone while in the general area of where a crime was committed. Beyond the court's concern with probable cause, it highlighted that no judicial review whatsoever was attained and law enforcement has unchecked discretion to seize the more intrusive data. Mr. Michel, are those the same concerning factors presented with the financial data that was turned over to the federal government in this case?
Yes.
Mr. Tedesco?
Yes.
Mr. Knight?
It sounds very similar.
My colleagues across the aisle have raised many concerns about broad violations of privacy of financial or technological institutions in trafficking private user data or revealing it to government authorities. In fact, during an Energy and Commerce hearing debate on comprehensive data privacy, there were several amendments to prohibit the collection of geolocation data on facilities such as Planned Parenthood that ban the transfer of that data to law enforcement or to government authorities. And we know that the CDC was collecting data to see if people were going to church during quarantine. Church during quarantine. This conversation, how we deal with this, is the fundamental question we have to answer as we move forward. And we can talk about January 6th in the event, and we can talk about all of that. But there were thousands of innocent people that went to Bass Pro Shops in Virginia in the 2 days before and after January 6th. Doesn't matter how bad you think the event was or where it was or whatever, you cannot get a warrant on somebody for exercising their constitutional rights. And if you can't get a warrant for somebody to do it, then we have to create a situation where banks and large corporations or anybody else or third-party data brokers, by the way, are allowed to sell that information, and law enforcement is allowed to obtain it without getting a warrant. This is a fundamental question. It's a perfect place to have it in this hearing, and it is exactly what happened in this case. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow on with my colleague from North Dakota, the notion that subpoenas are not sufficient to get information and that every ounce of evidence must be obtained by a search warrant has, of course, been repeatedly rejected by the Supreme Court over and over and over. And this hearing, the reason why, as Mr. Armstrong says, we are talking about January 6th is because, as I understand it, this hearing was initially spurred on by an FBI whistleblower who is not here testifying today. The one who ostensibly had the information about alleged wrongdoing is not here to stand in front of us, to testify under oath, to be questioned by members of both sides. Mr. Knight, I want to ask you a hypothetical. Let's say that there's a riot and an attack on our democracy on a particular day. We'll just call it January 6th for the purpose of this hypothetical. Let's say that the FBI has information that an individual was near the site of the riot that day. And let's say that the FBI had evidence that that individual purchased a firearm in the past 6 months. And let's say that the FBI had evidence that that same person planned to return 2 weeks later to interfere with another democratic process involving the President of the United States. Is it actually your testimony here today to say that it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment for the FBI to seek bank records for that individual?
May I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So, at least based upon the public information I have available, they did not know on an individualized basis that people were planning to return to cause violence. And I think that's a distinction that's worth
That's
noting.
fine. I agree with you. That's not in the hypothetical. They just knew they were going to return.
I believe you said something along the lines of evidence that they were coming back
To interfere. You're right.
interfere.
Let's just say that. Do you think the Fourth Amendment prohibits the FBI from getting bank records for that individual if they don't know that they are going to commit violence?
I think that's an easy warrant to get.
A warrant?
Yeah, I think that would be an easy warrant to get from a judge.
So you're now saying that you need to get a warrant for bank records?
I am saying you should have to get a warrant for bank records. The
So-
status
so
quo is you do
you
not.
Disagree, then, you disagree with the Supreme Court, which has upheld the constitutionality of the Bank Secrecy Act.
So if you'd like to talk about the Supreme Court precedent in the Bank Secrecy Act, I think that Carpenter, which is a far more recent case, points to some very strong questions about the constitutionality of the Bank Secrecy Act. I've written something about it. I'm happy to send to your
I
office.
understand. And by the way, I agree. I mean, but Carpenter also demonstrates that the Supreme Court is evolving and is evolving on the Fourth Amendment, and there's no question, and I will tell you as a former prosecutor, if I had that predication, I would fire off a subpoena to that bank every single day, 10 out of 10 times.
Well, respectfully, sir,
Now,
it
I'm
doesn't
sorry,
seem like they even use
I have to
subpoenas
move
here.
on. I have to move on because I think it's absolutely absurd that we are sitting here trying to make an argument that somehow the Fourth Amendment is being violated when there is specific, reasonable suspicion about every individual whose bank records were obtained because they bought a gun, they were at the insurrection, and they were going to come back. The fact of the matter is, we are once again here on a completely sham rationale. There was no First Amendment or Fourth Amendment violation around January 6th. This is simply another effort to whitewash what happened on January 6th. One of the members of the committee calls those who were convicted of crimes hostages, while there are actual American hostages sitting in Gaza right now under captivity of a terrorist organization. And we're supposed to equate the people sitting in jail who rioted and attacked this Capitol, we're supposed to equate them with these hostages. Mr. Chairman, you continually say that it used to be that both parties agreed with the First Amendment. It didn't used to be. It is. It remains the case. We all agree with the First Amendment. But the problem is that the First Amendment is not absolute. It does not protect any single thing anyone says. And there are limits, and that's important. And what this committee has been trying to do for the last year and a half is to chill the federal government from monitoring what is going on social media and otherwise out there, so that misinformation and disinformation can run rampant on Elon Musk's social platform and every other social platform, so that the Republicans, can benefit from it in November's election. That is why this committee exists.
The time of the gentleman
and
has
we have
expired.
gotten no evidence to support any of these allegations.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
I yield to the chairman such time as he may consider.
I appreciate that. I think the gentleman from New York just said that we're trying to chill the federal government. I don't know if it's ever been said that way. It's always the government trying to chill Americans' rights and chill Americans. I've never seen anything. I've never seen anything like. But guess what? You know who was opposed to how the FBI and the Bank of America did this thing when they asked for this information? You know who was opposed to it? 3 FBI agents. The guys on the case. George Hill, Bonavolanta, Steve Jensen, all testified to the committee that it was wrong. And guess who else said it was wrong? Chris Wray said this: we recalled this information to avoid even the appearance of any kind of overreach. So even the FBI, who was systematically violated Americans, this FBI who said, if you're a pro-life Catholic, you're an extremist. If you're a parent going to a school board meeting, you're a terrorist. Even the FBI said, this is ridiculous. And they pulled back. 3 agents testified. So, I mean, and somehow the government is the one who chills American speech when they pressure big tech to censor, when they ask banks to give them. That's chilling speech. And we've seen it first. Dr. Peterson's seen it in his own country, and now it's coming here. That's what we're concerned about. I yield back to the gentleman. Thank him for yielding.
Thank you, Chairman. And I would echo that. I'm glad that Thomas Massie started off with a recitation of the Fourth Amendment, because that's really why we're here. And while the other side wants to relitigate J6, the title of the hearing is about financial surveillance of American citizens. This is deeply troubling, that if you are a Catholic that cares about your child's education and you shop at Gander Mountain, that you are like prime suspect under some sort of weird rubric in a government surveillance operation. I think the Supreme Court, in looking at this, when they were looking at the BSA, in a concurring opinion said, Justice Powell and Justice Blackmun said, financial transactions can reveal much about a person's activities, associations, and beliefs. At some point, government intrusion upon these areas would implicate legitimate expectations of privacy. Moreover, the potential for abuse is particularly acute, whereas here, the legislative scheme permits access to this information without invocation of the judicial process. So, Mr. Tedesco, how do we get here? And at what point, or how do we get to a point where big banks can just freely hand over this information to the federal government?
Well, I think the biggest concern from our perspective is the systemic censorship risk within the banking industry that is really a product of the oversight and pervasive regulatory authority that bank supervisors have over banks. If you think about the top 5 banks have 50% of the bank deposit market in the United States, you see that there's a concentration of power in the banking industry. There's just a few banks that are heavily regulated. And because of the secrecy around bank supervision, the reasons why people are debanked and why these kinds of things are occurring is shrouded. And so it's a huge problem. The censorship risk is real in the financial industry sector.
Who would you consider to be the biggest victims of this surveillance operation?
I think it's the American citizens, and I think it's a bipartisan issue. Some of the Democrats in this chamber and in the Senate sent letters to the big banks just a few weeks ago talking about de-risking. They call debanking de-risking. We're talking about the same thing of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, including because of their religious donations and donations to charity. So it's a bipartisan issue, and I think we all should be concerned about it and try to work together for solutions.
No, I 100% agree with you. And you know, what do you think right now under the BSA, under the current structure, what is the remedy for Americans?
Well, there isn't much.
There is none, right? There is no mechanism for judicial review, right? So Americans cannot protest a bank who is ostensibly an arm of the government at this point. They cannot protest the disclosure of their financial transactions to the federal government. There's no mechanism for that, is there?
That's right.
And so, and obviously, they don't have any knowledge that their data was collected to begin with, do they?
Yeah, I think one of the scariest things I heard at this hearing was what Mr. Michel said, once the bank has the data, the government has the data.
Right. Can you hire a private security firm to search somebody's house without a warrant?
I don't think so, no.
No, you have to have a warrant. So what is the difference here?
It's a big risk, and it needs to be fixed.
So and you would articulate, let me ask you the panel this, do you think that under the current BSA or other laws that it would be wise, given where we are from a technological standpoint, do you think it would be wise to revisit the BSA or the other laws to provide that protection for Americans' privacy, sir?
Well, there were some concerns expressed earlier about what might happen in the aftermath, let's say, of Donald Trump's election with regards to political belief, and anything that facilitates the collusion between government and giant corporation and enables that kind of information gathering will absolutely be used in that way. That's why I made comments earlier regarding this as a bipartisan issue. Once this capability exists, and it's being magnified now, it will be used in all directions. So the people at risk will be politically active, vocal Americans. The silent ones will remain relatively safe. But
Thank you.
anyone who speaks.
And briefly, do y'all think that we should examine?
We should absolutely examine it.
Agree.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. The
Excuse me,
gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order. In your last statement, you said that Steve Jensen of the FBI opposed the collection of this information for banks. That's a misrepresentation of his testimony.
Not an appropriate
Jensen
point of order.
said
The
that the
gentlelady from
information was
Florida
not
is
used.
recognized
Would you
for 5
release the
minutes.
transcript so that we can hear
Not an
exactly
appropriate-
what
it's
Mr. Jensen
Not an appropriate
said?
point of order, and the gentlelady knows that, but she continues to try to ask.
Same way you do.
question that is not
Same
a
way
point of-
you interject.
I don't think
sir.
I've raised one point of order today.
You interject all the
The
time.
gentlelady from
sir.
Florida is recognized.
All the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm actually I continue to be stunned by the big government advocates that we come across and the ones that serve in this very chamber. They're not even hiding it anymore. They're saying the quiet part out loud. They want dependency, they want control. And the total disregard for the Constitution and the oath that many of my colleagues, actually all of my colleagues, have taken and violated, it's so disturbing to me. Many people know, probably as evidenced by what is on the face of my iPad, that I detest big government and I detest big tech. The two combined have proven to be a lethal combination when it comes to liberty and freedom. Because quite frankly, we know that the MO of big tech and big financial institutions combined with big government, it's to erode and evade Americans' constitutional rights. And we're here today because of a blatant Fourth Amendment violation, where big banks colluded with big government to turn over data that didn't belong to them to target Americans, innocent Americans. Because in this country, it is still a fact that you are innocent until proven guilty, despite what everyone is trying to do and flip that around. Now, Dr. Peterson, it's good to see you again. I couldn't help but notice your reaction when my colleague was talking about the First Amendment not being absolute. And so I do want to give you the opportunity to weigh in and respond to that. I couldn't help but notice your reaction. But before I do, I am really glad that you have been talking about the social credit system that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, utilizes. I am literally around the corner in a classified briefing right now talking about the use of big tech and how it is targeting American citizens. In fact, this very morning, I have been inundated in my office with phone calls from TikTok users who have been denied access to the app because they live in my congressional district, and until they call my office and demand that I do not take adverse action against the app, that they cannot use it. Talk about big tech directing behavior. I think that we are on a very dangerous path, and I want to give you my time to really lay out in the most succinct way possible the dangerous nexus of big tech, big government, and financial institutions that seek to weaponize that information against Americans. And I know you are more than capable of doing that in 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
I don't think people understand the degree to which they are profiled online and to which their virtual representation is now an iconic representation of them, nor do they understand that they have no rights whatsoever to that representation. So, for example, let's say we turn our information about our purchasing habits over to the bank when we open a bank account. 30 years ago, that wasn't such a big problem. With AI systems, it's a problem that's so big you can't imagine it. I mean, I'm certain that my staff could find the data online to absolutely predict your voting patterns with 95% accuracy. You have no idea what sort of digital footprint that you're leaving behind you, and there are almost no protections for that. And so now, and you also asked about the First Amendment.
Yes.
Well, we have very weak free speech protections in Canada, and I can tell you that is not going well. And so the combination in my country, the combination of that and the invasive technology that we're producing at a rate that beggars the imagination, produces a threat to the integrity of sovereign citizenship, the likes of which has not yet been experienced. Right? And that's what this committee should be concentrating on. Like, it's very interesting to watch it because it devolves continually into discussion of a particular event, serious though that event was. It's like, no matter how serious that event was, it pales in comparison to the potential severity of the issue that we're attempting to point to with regards to our testimony. These artificially intelligent systems can do things you can't imagine. And not only can they are and they will. And that will be abetted by the collusion between large corporations and government. And it's certainly the case that the people who stand on the left, especially with regards to their, what would you say, skepticism of large corporations, which is often perfectly warranted, should be utterly terrified about this.
Man, you did that in less time than I thought.
Well, I had to get it right once today.
No, I appreciate that. And I think you have seen it front and center. Certainly, we all watched in horror as the truckers' bank accounts were seized or shut down, who protested the mandates. And people think that that's such a faraway concept, but we have seen that here with people who have been given ultimatums of jab or job, and we've seen ways that they've been targeted and positioned in ways that are just un-American, unconstitutional. So thank you all to our witnesses for being here today. I appreciate you guys in the fight against weaponization, and we're seeing it more and more every day. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. This concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the subcommittee today. And I apologize, I do have to run out to another thing, but we really appreciate the discussion that you all brought and the analysis that you brought today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.